All right, everyone, welcome to our Integrated Systems for Nonprofits webinar. I am joined by Scott Hallra, Managing Partner of Vin Technology. Scott, feel free to take it away.
Fantastic, thanks so much. Well, appreciate everybody making time for this today. Quick agenda, we're gonna do some introductions. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, but I wanna try to get a sense for who we've got in the audience today as well, so we'll throw up a quick poll in just a moment. We're going to take a minute first to talk about Salesforce.com and how it might be able to be used in your organization if you're not already using it. And then from there, we'll talk a little bit about the problem that the organizations face with disconnected systems. And then from there, we'll talk about different ways that you might go about integrating Salesforce.com and Intacct. And then as we kind of close out, we'll talk about what are some of the things you need to think about before beginning an integration project. It's definitely not the sort of thing that you just jump into lightly. So with that, quick survey. Can we throw up the poll? Want to first find out how many of you are currently using Salesforce.com. Take a minute, hit the, fill out the poll. So far, it doesn't look like anybody's using Salesforce. All right, let's go ahead and roll to the next question. Love to know, are you currently using Intacct? Got one no, okay, good deal. So nobody on Intacct yet, all right. I guess this next question, for whatever systems you're using today, do you have an integration between your donor management system and accounting system or any kind of operational system and your accounting system? Looks like no. Okay, very good. And then finally, we'd like to kind of understand who do we have in the audience? Are you in finance, IT, donor development, or some other role within the organization? Okay. Very good. All right, well, that helps me tremendously. Appreciate you taking a minute to do that. It's always nice to know the audience as we begin these kind of presentations. So real quick, my name is Scott Hallra. I am managing partner at a company called Vin Technology. Vin Technology, we are first and foremost a Salesforce.com consulting firm. We're based in Dallas. We've got people scattered throughout the country, but Dallas is our headquarters. I myself am a graduate of the May School at Texas A&M. I've been working in the Salesforce ecosystem for a little over 8 years now. In that time, I've had the opportunity to work across a very, very wide variety of industry verticals, from finance to energy to retail and hospitality. And then I've got an extensive background working in nonprofit. And you know, nonprofit is so varied in and of itself. I think I've worked in just about every nook and cranny of nonprofit as well at some point. I and everyone on my team maintains some level of certification on the Salesforce platform. I personally have 6 certifications. And then personally and as an organization, we really try to focus on the big picture of what an organization is trying to accomplish with technology. So when we approach a project, it's not just about the CRM, it's what are the things feeding the CRM and what are the things that are coming out of the CRM going on into other systems. And that really kind of leads us into our conversation today around financial integration between Salesforce and Intacct. So with that, I want to take just a few minutes and talk about Salesforce and CRM and why CRM, and then we'll kind of move into that integration discussion. So first off, CRM and your accounting system with Intacct, it's a very powerful combination and it's a natural combination. If we're taking in donations, if we're receiving grants, we need a system to track the efforts to bring in that revenue as well as a place to record, record those transactions. And so that CRM and Intacct, Salesforce and Intacct, it's a natural and powerful combination. When we integrate these systems in an automated sense, we're going to reduce effort, we're going to reduce data entry, we're going to reduce errors, and so forth. And then not knowing the size of your organizations, you may or may not have a CRM today, or at least you may not think you have a CRM. I'm going to tell you that you have a CRM whether you know it or not. Your CRM system may look something like this. For others of you, your CRM may look something like this. And still for others of you, your CRM may look like this. So hopefully you're not in one of these categories, but if you are, you're not alone. We've seen it all. So what's wrong with that? If we are working on spreadsheets and sticky notes, what's wrong with that? Well, number one, we've got silos of information. The person A doesn't necessarily know what person B is doing. It's going to be difficult for us to forecast, if we're in a grant environment, how do we know what our grant pipeline looks like? Next, how do we know what our people are doing? What are people spending time on? Are we calling the same people with the same ask? That doesn't look good. If we don't have a solid system, how do we know if our marketing efforts are actually being effective at cultivating new donors and driving new donations? These other systems, these disjointed systems, they're error prone. How many of us have been working in an Excel spreadsheet and we forgot that we had that filter applied and all of a sudden something just doesn't look right? That's the kind of situation we might find ourselves if we're not working in a true robust CRM. And then finally, without a robust CRM tool, we don't get that consistency. We don't ensure that processes are consistently followed like we do if we're working in a true system. So let's transition a little bit and talk about Salesforce.com. I'd be very surprised if everybody on the call is hearing of Salesforce.com for the first time, but just in case, Salesforce is far and away the leader in customer relationship management. The application scales down from small mom and pops to very large organizations and everything in between. Very notable, Forbes has ranked Salesforce as its most innovative company for 6 years in a row. So something that we do hear from time to time when we're talking to nonprofits about Salesforce.com, they kind of look at me with a puzzled look and say, we're a nonprofit. Why are you recommending something called Salesforce? Well, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked. So Salesforce, at its core, it is that customer relationship management system. And many of those CRM concepts apply to any organization that deals with people and tracks any sort of interaction and any sort of transaction. And so Salesforce, it's really, really neat. When the company was founded in the late 90s, Salesforce said, you know what, we're going to build the best software in the world, and we're also going to give back to the communities that our tools serve. And they do that through the Salesforce Foundation or Salesforce.org. Among the many, many things that Salesforce.org does, in addition to cash grants and volunteer programs and things like that, the Salesforce Foundation will give any 501c3 or higher ed institution 10 free licenses of their enterprise level CRM. And then when we need to purchase license 11, 12, and beyond, or if we want to add products outside of just the core CRM, maybe we want to look at their marketing automation tools, maybe we want to look at their communities product or something else, they offer very, very deep discounts to nonprofits compared to what a for-profit would pay. So just to give you some comparison of what that looks like, if you go out online, you will find that the list price for an enterprise CRM license is $150 per user per month. Salesforce is going to give that license to a nonprofit for $36 per user per month. So Salesforce really does a lot for the nonprofit community. In addition to the grant and the great pricing that they offer to nonprofits, There are multiple ways that a nonprofit might configure Salesforce. For some of you, straight up Salesforce like we use at Venn Technology may be a great fit. If you're a membership organization, that could be a really great way to go. If you do a lot of fee-for-service work and you operate kind of more along the lines of how a for-profit works, straight up Salesforce is probably a great fit for you. For other organizations, and I'd say that probably 80+% of the nonprofits that we work with kind of fall into this latter category. We're typically talking about organizations that have a high volume of relatively low dollar kind of donations. So if you've got a lot of $50 a month recurring donations and the one-off gifts and things like that, where we really need to track our donors in the context of a household and know that Bob and Janet are married and they live under the same roof and maybe even here's their kids. That Nonprofit Success Pack is a free overlay that really takes kind of the traditional CRM and makes it work better in the context of that type of nonprofit. So lots of different ways to set up Salesforce for your organization. Kind of talking about Intacct and Salesforce for a moment. Intacct was actually one of Salesforce's very first partners. We're going to talk about something in a minute called the App Exchange. Intacct was one of the very first partners to launch a product on the App Exchange, and today Intacct is actually a platinum partner in the Salesforce world. They've developed some very, very slick and robust integrations across these two systems, so they play very, very well together. So let's pause for a second. You've heard me talk about Salesforce and how great these different things are. But when we look at the donor management world and the tools that are available to nonprofits, it's a crowded field. There are lots and lots of players in that space, and frankly, it seems like every day we're learning about another one that's popped up. So why Salesforce as opposed to some of these other tools? Well, nobody, and I mean nobody, has the ecosystem that Salesforce does. And I kind of think of that like our smartphones. So if you were walking into the AT&T or Verizon or Sprint store today, my guess is that if you were looking for a new phone and you went up to that sales rep, you're probably not going to say to them, hey, I can't wait to get my hands on that new Windows phone, or show me the latest BlackBerry. Chances are you're going to go into that store and you're going to say, hey, have you got the iPhone 10 yet? Or how about that new Google Pixel I keep hearing about? And the reason that you're going to gravitate toward those tools is because of the platform that they offer. Those devices are far more than just a phone and an email device. You've got these app stores where you've got access to millions upon millions of different apps that extend and enhance the capabilities of that device that you carry in your pocket. And Salesforce is very, very much the same way. So just like the operating systems on our phones are platforms, Salesforce in and of itself is a platform. And in fact, it is the fact that Salesforce is a platform, not just an application, that's the most important thing to know about it. So I keep talking about a platform. What does that mean, and why do I care? Well, while yes, it does offer this great out-of-the-box functionality, we've got tools to go in and build all kinds of additional things, from really basic stuff like adding a custom field or creating a new table or object in the system. We can do that in Salesforce. We've got very rich tools to allow us to automate manual processes, whether that's sending email alerts or creating tasks for people when certain things happen. Their APIs allow us to integrate third-party tools like Salesforce and Intacct. And it just goes on and on and on. So Salesforce, again, while it is a great application, more importantly, it's a platform upon which we can build all kinds of other things. So I want to talk about a couple use cases before we get into our integration discussion. Like I mentioned a minute ago, 80% or more of the organizations we see that start using Salesforce they pick it up to help them manage their donor relationships. However, Salesforce, because it is that platform, that flexible platform, we can use it to do so many other things beyond just donor management. So I'm going to talk about 2 use cases before we get into integration. One of our clients, they are not a foundation, but they operate kind of like a foundation would. In addition to many, many other parts of their mission, this organization has been blessed financially, and in many cases, they turn around and are flowing money out to other organizations doing good work. And so people within the organization, we've built functionality in Salesforce to allow their users to submit a funding request. So they've got some partner organization that needs help or that they want to support. And so they go into Salesforce and they fill out this funding request. Once a quarter, they meet as an organization to take a look at all of the requests that have come in. And in that meeting, they're running that meeting out of Salesforce, and they will approve, reject, or partially approve each of the requests that have come in throughout the quarter. And then we built functionality in Salesforce to help them track whether or not they've got the appropriate financial documents on file. And then in addition to the cash that they give, this organization also from time to time has hard assets, tangible items that they give, whether that's books or DVDs, or in one case, somebody had gifted the organization a boat and one of their partners needed a boat, and so they were able to pass that through. So we're tracking these tangible items in addition to the cash that they're distributing. And what's really cool about this is this organization can get a full picture of their relationship with the partner. So we log all of our interactions that we have with them. We track the campaigns, the emails that we're sending to them, and then we can also get this picture of, what have we done, what have we, gifted them with, and then down the road, we'll also add some functionality to track what are the outcomes that this organization has achieved because of these gifts. So that's one use case that's outside of that kind of core donor management. Another one I want to talk about, we work with an international missions organization who, again, started using Salesforce to track their donors. And one day as we're sitting in the conference room with their executive staff, we're talking about the program side of their business. And this organization, faith-based organization that works with people in illiterate nations, and they do that through these weekly meetings or discussion groups. And so we started talking about, well, how do you manage this today? And they said, well, if we manage it at all, it's in spreadsheets and it's really haphazard. And so what we did is we spent a lot of time kind of walking through their process and what actually goes on out in the field. And we built out this data model in Salesforce to help them track where all of these things are taking place. What languages are they working in? What stories have they translated into these different languages? Who is leading these groups? And then most importantly, what is the outcome of what's happening in these meetings? And what's really cool about that is we've got the revenue side being recorded from the donations. Now we've got the program side, the outcomes that are right there. And so we can build a dashboard in Salesforce that kind of tells a story, money in, outcomes out. So little bit different than just the donor management side of things. A couple of other things. We talked earlier about Salesforce being a platform, and we talked about our smartphone analogy. Much like we've got the App Store or Google Play on our Android devices, Salesforce has something called the App Exchange. This number may actually be over 4,000 now, but as of earlier this year, they had over 3,000 applications that you could install into Salesforce, connect to Salesforce in some way that makes your Salesforce.com system that much more valuable. So in a nonprofit, we might look to online donation tools that are going to seamlessly feed the donors and donations into Salesforce. Maybe we need to do some event registration or marketing automation, or even project management. Chances are there's an app for that out there, out on the App Exchange. All right, so now that we've kind of talked about Salesforce, let's transition the conversation toward integration, specifically Salesforce and Intacct integration. So why integrate in the first place? Well, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but manual data entry across systems is time-consuming and error-prone. I like to say that the more times you have to actually touch the data, the more likely you are to have something go wrong. And even if it's semi-automated, maybe we dump some things out into a spreadsheet where we run a macro, or we've got some formulas that we need to calculate. You know, what happens when something that macro gets corrupted or our formula was wrong? Well, we're going to get bad data into our accounting system. If we are manually keying those entries, you know, that just greatly opens up the door for more potential errors. The other thing that we see with these manual processes is that it takes time, not only for the person to do it, but it can also mean that there's a gap in time from when the transactions are recorded in CRM and the timing with which they get recorded in accounting. And so we don't always have that real up-to-date information in our business critical financial system. And then for organizations that may deal with some product, which we do see some of in the nonprofit space, without that integration, you know, we don't have insight into other operational aspects as well. So let's talk through a handful of options we have for developing integrations among Salesforce and Intacct. The first one, this will come as no surprise, and I'm sure that at some point everybody on this call has done an export-import type operation. Last Friday, I'm sure some of you guys had to run payroll, and my guess is that you probably imported a file from your payroll provider. That's great. It is quote unquote free, with the exception of your time that it takes to go through and potentially do some manipulation to that data prior to import. But it is time consuming and it is error prone. We've got an organization we work with down in Austin, Texas, who they weren't quite ready for a full-on automated integration, and they said, hey guys, can you help us get our transactions coded inside of Salesforce and build a basic export file that we can then import into Intacct. And we cautioned them against that. We really tried to have them look more closely at an automated integration, and ultimately they said, hey, we're not ready for that yet. And we ran into a situation where their controller had exported some data out, imported it, only to realize later that they applied the wrong date filters to the export, and some of their data got captured twice. And obviously we don't want that. So import export, it's certainly out there. It's certainly an option, but you got to proceed with caution there. The next option to consider are packaged integrations. So we mentioned earlier that Intacct has an integration for Salesforce, and on the plus side, these packaged integrations are quick to implement, and it's great because Intacct, they're going to roll out new features and functionality in that integration over time. However, on kind of the downside, these packaged integrations are just that. They are packaged. And if your use case fits inside the box of what that packaged integration does, then that tool is probably the right tool for you. That is the way that you should go. But if it's not, if your use case doesn't match up with how that packaged integration works, it's probably not going to be a viable option for you. And then the other thing with these packaged integrations is that they don't necessarily play well with customizations you have made. I talked earlier about how Salesforce is a platform, and there's a lot that we can go in and do to tailor Salesforce to the organization. Sometimes that tailoring doesn't play well with the packaged integration. So the integration tool that I spoke of earlier that Intacct makes available, just to give you some context, it's really great for managing a quote to cash kind of process where we're going to create a sales order and convert it to a sales invoice and track payments against that. And again, if your organization, if you do a lot of fee for service, maybe if you're a membership organization, that might work really well for you. But if that's not the type of work that you do, this is going to be a challenging approach for you. To kind of visualize, I like pictures, to visualize how the data flows. The way that this particular tool is going to work is we're going to take all of our accounts and they're going to become customers in Intacct. And our opportunities in Salesforce are going to create sales orders, and products are going to be syncing. And then as we invoice and collect payments, that information is going to be flowing back from Intacct to Salesforce. And again, we just don't see a whole lot of nonprofits where this works. So the next option would be writing custom code in the form of web services. On the plus side, you get exactly what you want. We've got these rich, robust APIs, but you get exactly what you want as long as what you want is something that the API supports. However, custom code is usually going to be the most costly option. It's going to take longer to implement, and you're not going to have the flexibility when you need to make a change. So if you've added some new fields, or maybe you need the integration to fire based on some different criteria, you're going to have to bring in a developer to actually make those changes. You've got to have experience with code in order to make those changes. So what's another option? If the import export may have its challenges, if the package doesn't work, if the custom code is going to be the most costly, what is kind of maybe the best of all worlds? The approach that we take at Venn more often than not is to use a middleware tool. So both JMT, we partner with JMT, and collectively we partner with a company called Workato that creates the ability for us to configure integrations as opposed to code integrations. Much like that custom code approach, we get exactly what we want. The middleware tools can do anything that the API supports. We also get extensibility into multiple systems. So with a tool like Workato, we might need to string together numerous applications. Maybe we've got Eventbrite where we're doing event registrations and the fees associated with that. We want to pass that event registration into Workato, and then the monies coming from that we want to flow on into Intacct. With middleware, we can string together multiple applications, again, using configuration as opposed to code. On the downside, it isn't packaged, so it's not something that we can necessarily stand up in half a day, but at the same time, it gives us that flexibility. And then, of course, there is an investment, rather, in the integration tool itself. So I want to take a minute now, and now that we've talked about Salesforce and all the great things that we can do with Salesforce, and we talked about integration between Salesforce and Intacct, I want to walk through a couple of high-level case studies on some Salesforce to Intacct integrations that we've done. So the first one we're going to talk about is an organization in the Dallas area where we work, who is using Salesforce with that nonprofit success pack. They've got an online donation tool called Pure Charity. They've also got a legacy ACH processing tool called CashLink that doesn't have an API, so we can't tap directly into their data. We've got a component of the integration leveraging Dropbox, and then we've got some data that gets manually entered into Salesforce. Within Intacct, they have multiple journals set up. Based on the source of the gift, we will send journal entries to, Journal A versus Journal B. And then as for the journal entries themselves, we do it in detail, what we call detail. So we've got a credit and a debit for each transaction. Visually, here's kind of what that integration looks like. So we've got Salesforce, and then we've got this tool, Pure Charity. I mentioned earlier the Salesforce App Exchange. Pure Charity is a tool that has a direct integration into Salesforce. So if somebody goes online and makes a gift, that donor and the donation are going to flow seamlessly into Salesforce without anybody having to touch the system. We talked a minute ago about that legacy ACH processing tool that doesn't have an API. Well, they do give us the ability to pull data out, and so we take that data and we save it in a CSV into a Dropbox folder. And that middleware tool I referenced earlier called Workato, they're going to pick up that CSV. They're going to see that new file has been added to Dropbox. And we've built some routines in Workato that says, I know exactly what donor to attach this to, and I know how to create that donation record into Salesforce. They've also got some operational data, and the system where that operational data comes from, unfortunately, also does not have an API. So here we do have an export situation for that operations data. They save that into a Google Drive folder. Again, kind of like that CSV for the ACH processes. We pick up that operations data from Google Drive, we send it into Salesforce and tie it back with the correct constituent. And then every night we're creating those journal entries in Intacct without anybody having to watch it, babysit it. When the controller comes in the morning, yesterday's transactions are all seamlessly in Salesforce, coded correctly. So that's one example. Another group we work with called Preemptive Love Coalition, also using that nonprofit success pack. This particular group has data coming into Salesforce from a whole bunch of other places. So they've got Stripe credit card and ACH payments going into Salesforce, PayPal, Authorize.net. This organization also has an e-commerce component to it. They've got an online store where, they have an online store where you may go out onto their store and purchase an item that is going to be an item that you're actually going to receive. You also have the ability to purchase items that are going to go to benefit somebody else. So this particular group, they work with refugees in Iraq and Syria, and they many of the refugees that they work with are tradesmen that make soaps and candles and things like that. And so they will actually sell some of those products, but at the same time, these tradesmen need help. And so you might go onto the website, onto their Shopify store, and buy a toolkit or some livestock that would actually be given to these refugees. And in that same transaction, you may have components of that are tax deductible, i.e. the livestock, and other components that are non-tax deductible, i.e. that candle that you bought to give as a gift to somebody. And so we've got logic so that as that data comes into Salesforce, we know exactly how much to receipt somebody for at the end of the year. And then they do a lot of communications through Slack. Over in Intacct, unlike the previous example where we were doing those detailed journal entries, this organization has high volume. Their peak giving day last year, last December, I think they had over 16,000 individual donations come through. And so they definitely didn't want the detail. So we built some advanced logic to summarize those journal entries, and we group it by their payment processor. So there's going to be a separate batch for Stripe, a separate batch for PayPal, and so forth. That makes their bank rec a lot easier by being able to break it out by these different payment providers. All of our journal entries are going to include GL and certain dimension codes. However, their requirements were such that there are some exceptions. In some cases, we need to track an item. So again, that soap or the livestock, we needed to know that the transaction was for some sort of item. Most nonprofits don't want all of their donors replicated in across CRM and Intacct. Well, they had a unique requirement that when a single gift of $5,000 or more comes from one donor, they need to now track them as a major donor, and therefore they need to tie all of their future giving to a customer in Intacct. So sometimes with our advanced logic, we do include customers. And in certain situations, we actually will include both. And then one other thing, they use project accounting within Intacct, and we built some logic that says, hey, when a new campaign record gets created in Salesforce, create a corresponding project record over in Intacct. So their integration looks a little bit different. So we've got Salesforce there in the middle. They've got all of those different payment processors that are feeding data into Salesforce. We've got some tools that live directly inside of Salesforce where they are hand entering data. And then we've got Shopify, that online store, feeding into Workato. And then we've got these summary tables and a lot of complex logic that does that summarization we talked about on the previous slide. And then again, we send that data over into Intacct. And another unique thing that this particular organization had is they said, you know what, we want to actually have the ability to do a little bit of review of the data before it gets sent into Intacct. And so we've instituted a system by which there's actually a 3-day wait before any transactions make their way over into the accounting system. So tremendous flexibility. We really can tailor an integration to anybody's requirements. The last example that I want to talk about is a large foundation. They also use that nonprofit success pack. They use some components inside of Salesforce that these other organizations don't. This group, again, high volume, even more so than the previous one. A lot of that actually comes by way of a payroll deduction or employer match. And their Salesforce environment is incredibly customized. When we think about their integration, not only do we have that donor or customer component, but because they're a foundation and they're distributing money, not just taking money in, we've got a component in our integration that will actually create a vendor for them. So not just creating customers, but creating vendors. When they're working with certain organizations, they actually do have to track AR, and we've got components of that feeding in from Salesforce. And then what's really cool is back on the vendor side, as they are distributing funds, we can actually create that AP bill from Salesforce into Intacct. And when it gets paid, we can update Salesforce so that the people that are working in Salesforce and not the accounting system, they know when a check has been cut. Their integration is a little bit more complicated. There's so many moving parts, and for us to really break that down, we'd be here all day. So we'll just say it's complicated, but it's very doable given the power of these best-of-breed systems with Salesforce Intacct and having the flexibility of that middleware tool as well. All right, so we've talked about some use cases. What are some things we need to think about before we just dive headlong into one of these integration projects? The first thing that I would say is we've got to begin with the end in mind. We need to know exactly what it is we want the integration to do for us. And so I think that the best way for us to be able to tell, do we know what the integration needs to do for us? Can we finish this sentence? When our systems are properly integrated, we will be able to ... So an example might be when our systems are properly integrated, we will be able to have all of our customers in sync across systems where users can see full order and payment history in each application. Or another example, we'll have summarized journal entries in our GL on a daily basis. In our example with that foundation, theirs was slightly different. So for you and your organization, think about what does this integration really need to accomplish for us. The next thing is you really, really need to make sure that your business processes are well defined. Does everybody know how we're supposed to do this and how we're supposed to do that? If we're not on the same page, this is not going to work. We're going to have bad data in one system that's going to create bad data in the other. We need to understand, where does that integration begin and where does it end? So we've talked a lot about Salesforce and Intacct integration. I've also talked about how as a firm, we view the project with the big picture in mind. And so we're not just thinking Salesforce and we're not just thinking Intacct, but we're thinking, okay, how is data coming into Salesforce? Do we have an online donation tool that's feeding that data into Salesforce? And if so, what do we need to do inside of Salesforce to code that data, those transactions, so that they flow seamlessly to Intacct? So where does it begin? Where does it end? And then some other things to think about. Do we want this integration to just automatically run on a schedule or an event? In other words, does this just run every night at midnight, or does this run when a new donation is created? Other options, do we want this to run when somebody clicks a button? In other words, do we want to manually tell the system on an individual basis, okay, yes, this record needs to go? And then still, another option that you might consider is there some sort of accounting review that needs to take place? We're going to review this whole batch before we just send it all over. So lots of things to consider. Next, what is the quality of your data? And in nonprofit in particular, this is an area where we get tripped up really, really easily. We've all heard the expression garbage in, garbage out. And oftentimes we think about that in terms of reporting, but I'm going to tell you it's that much more important when we're talking about integration. If you've got bad data in Salesforce, you're going to wind up with bad data in Intacct. So bad data can actually manifest itself in multiple ways. The most common is duplicates. How many John Doe donors do we have in Salesforce? If we've got 3 of them and we are syncing our customers, our donors as customers, we're going to wind up with 3 John Does over in Intacct. Next, is the data accurate, or do we have missing pieces? Do we have phone numbers but not mailing addresses? Things like that. And then this last one is really, really critical when we're thinking about integrating systems that are already up and running today. So if you've already got Salesforce or Intacct and you're looking to launch a new integration across the systems, we've got to make sure that we've got common IDs across them. So that customer example I mentioned a minute ago, if we are syncing donors and customers, we need to make sure that we've got a common ID so that we don't duplicate them. If we are dealing with items or products, we've got to make sure that our item codes or SKUs are the same in both systems. Otherwise, we're going to wind up with duplicates. So once you've kind of gone through these, what are kind of the final steps to undertake before beginning this integration project? First, I would tell you, look at the packaged integration options first. So in the case of Salesforce and Intacct, do take the time to evaluate whether or not that is the right tool for you. If it's not, we would encourage you to evaluate middleware as a second option, and then custom code as kind of the last resort. Next, make sure that all of your stakeholders are in alignment. Nothing will derail an integration project faster than key people in the process not being on the same page. And then finally, make sure to coordinate across all of your solution providers. So Venn Technology, my firm, and JMT Consulting, we do a lot of work together. We've got the expertise on the Salesforce side. They've got the expertise on the Intacct side. And together, when we're all working closely together, we're able to create these successful end-to-end solutions. So make sure that everybody that's got their own piece of the puzzle, make sure that they're together around a common table as you guys put this together. So with that, let's go ahead and open the floor to questions. Samuel, we got anything?
Well, thanks for doing this, Scott. Appreciate you taking the time,
Absolutely.
man.
Well, yep, appreciate everybody being on. In terms of what's going to happen from here, for everybody that made it today, you should get a call from your client account manager at JMT. If there's anything that you heard in this that's got you really excited and you just can't wait, go ahead and call JMT at the number on the screen, and look forward to working with you guys on an integration project at some point. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Scott. You have a good one.